Banning bottled water, the excitement. So municipalities, lots of municipalities all across the country have already banned bottled water. Some of the resolutions are a little bit fuzzy, and we're working on that because some of them just say that they're going to encourage the use of bottled water, which doesn't actually ban bottled water. But we're, like, you know, ourselves, the Council of Canadians, the Polaris Institute, lots of other organizations across the country, folks like Grassroots, you know, people like the folks here in Kwantlen are doing this work, and, like, you know, people are following up and making sure that it's actually happening. The big thing that's helped is the FCM resolution. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities passed a resolution that basically called for the banning of bottled water in the municipal halls, buildings, and their meetings. And it's easier now for people to take that and be like, listen, like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which you were attending up in Whistler, passed this resolution. You need to take this more seriously, and we want you to, like, start looking into how you're going to actually make this happen. And then campuses, we're hearing about campuses slowly getting into this bottled water ban as well. I believe in Winnipeg, one of the universities is already passed a ban, and there's a couple of other places that are looking at it. Some folks in Victoria at UVic are actually looking at doing something as well. But there's the excitement, so I get all excited about this, like, what's next? Well, why don't we go to high schools and talk about this? People have gone to school boards and already presented, but you can go to, like, your principal, get some, you know, younger people involved, like students that just want to, like, you know, understand the issue, understand waste, understand the environment, and want to take it up. Soccer games, this is a personal favorite of mine. I think some folks in Delta from the Council of Canadians chapter is going to do this, because I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to soccer practice, and we had those big, huge containers that our parents used to bring in cars, and just, like, sort of, like, you know, from a tap, they just, like, serve water in little cups to everybody. I was just thinking about it because, like, people are like, oh, it's so convenient to have bottled water. You're lugging around the same amount of water, right? In soccer games, like, people buy these crates of water and they put them in their car, and you could just take one big container and do the same thing. So it's a real easy opportunity when people say, well, what do we do if we ban bottled water? The solutions are out there. They just existed 20 years ago, and people are forgetting them. I don't totally remember 20 years ago, but and then the ultimate thing, like, I think where this could really lead, and which would be really exciting, is that when we get to the point of actually asking stores to not sell bottled water. I mean, that's ultimately, like, you know, that's like the pinnacle, right? Because you're actually saying, even in terms of consumer choice, it just does not make sense, right? Like, you should not be doing this. It's going to be too damaging to the environment, and ultimately it's a commodification of a resource that should be in public and common hands. Hard questions always come up. Communities without safe drinking water, right? Like, what do you go say to the people in Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, that have had their river completely destroyed to the point that fish are coming mutated out of it, right? They cannot drink that water. And the good thing is that the hard questions actually, like I said at the beginning, get you to start thinking about the broader campaign in terms of water justice and water rights. Because it's not just technically about bottled water. Bottled water is a start, but we really need to start thinking about, well, do we need to start calling on the tar sands industry to shut down? And that sounds extreme, and it might not have to happen right away because their people's jobs are at stake and that sort of stuff. But ultimately, if you're destroying an entire river, an entire lake, the Athabasca Lake, one of the biggest lakes in North America, that could easily sustain large communities if, like, the world went to hell, you know, it's something that's being destroyed, and, like, we need to actually start, when we're talking about fighting for justice in water, it actually starting to mean you have to start challenging the industries that are destroying it. North Vancouver, you guys remember, what was it, 2 years ago or a year ago, when there was, like, all that sort of, like, runoff in the water and people had, like, those drinking water advisories? We know why that's happening. It's development along the sides of creeks and watersheds, right? Like, when you start pulling off trees along the sides of these creeks and watersheds, you're going to get contaminated water. And this is where then people will start thinking about, well, if we don't have bottled water and we're relying on our public utility, we need to also start going up there and being like, don't pull out these trees next to our creeks and rivers, right? So again, the beauty of the campaign, it gets you doing more. Mistrust of the public utilities, it's purely a political game. someone already mentioned to me that water at the public utilities is actually monitored and like tested way more often than bottled water ever is. The issue here, which will come up if especially our friend Mr. Campbell continues to do what he's doing in every other sector of our lives, is when you start cutting funding to those services. So you start cutting funding to the point where you can't do tests, you can't do these things, and what happens is that you're basically getting to the point where you can't have a trust in your water system because there isn't resources to manage it. So we really need to push for those resources to be there. And then the barriers, the actual barriers. So like there's the hard questions, but there's actual barriers. One of the big ones you're going to come across, and at City Hall you'll come across this as well, is the corporate contracts. And most councillors are not going to want to talk about this. Most campuses are not going to want to talk about this because it makes them look really stupid. Why the hell would you give an exclusive contract to some company for whatever amount of money and exclusive rights, right? So I was giving the example of UBC before. UBC signed, I believe it was a 10-year contract with Coca-Cola. I actually could be longer than that, but I'm pretty sure it's at least 10 years. And in that contract, like basically what started happening is that they started shutting down water fountains. They started like putting up these signs like, oh, the water in these fountains might not be that, safe, so we better drink bottled water. And within the contract, they actually also had UBC guarantee the number of sales of bottled water. This is the sort of stuff that they sign. And if you come across a contract, one of the things you absolutely must do, and you can do it by a Freedom of Information request, is actually get a copy of the contract that they signed. I'm imagining City Hall in most places will be a little bit better than these campuses, but I also wouldn't give them all the credit in the world. I totally can see that they could have signed a contract like that. Industry marketing, you guys know about that. It's horrible, it's stupid. So when I'm not sure if folks saw this, but when some of these bans were coming and they were sort of like gaining momentum across the country, Toronto had a ban, and London, Ontario, Vancouver was looking at it, and all this stuff was going up. Nestle actually ran some ads which like basically had like a toilet bowl, and was basically, the suggestion was that you're drinking the water from the same pipes as this water, right? This was their ad, right? So, and it works though, right? Like, I mean, us sitting here, like, we laugh at it because we're like, yeah, these guys are idiots, but for just someone that like slips up the paper subliminally, like you keep feeding the people that stuff and they'll grab crap water. Last thing is accessibility of water. So the common thing that people will say now, and it's partly because of the examples we just gave in terms of shutting down water fountains and that sort of stuff, is that it's easily available, right? So for example, again, I used to work in the downtown east side for a little while. In the downtown east side, even though people don't have a lot of money, are living on like check to check, like on welfare checks, and like, single moms that have a child and like are trying to make it by, are buying bottled water. One of the reasons why is that on a hot summer day and you're in the neighborhood, there isn't any public drinking fountains, right? So what do? Like, you need something to drink. Like, people are not gonna, and you can obviously get water from home, but the other thing is that one of the things that the Council of Canadian chapter in Vancouver has loosely thought about doing is, in addition to the bottled water ban, the next step would be to actually ask for the installation of water fountains throughout the city. Because for people that say, well, what do we do about people wanting water? Well, there's your solution. And it isn't then about buying Coke, right? Like, it's like, oh, if you ban bottled water, people will just buy Coke. No, if you ban bottled water and put up a fountain, people will just use a bottle and drink water, like they normally would.